Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, John Meuret describes the run in soybean prices. Henry Hilscher talks about using silage in feedlot diets. Brian Krienke discusses sensor-based nitrogen fertigation, and Ignacio Ciampitti reviews research looking at nitrogen use in soybeans. John Meuret from Meuret Grain Company is our market analyst this week. At the end of March, the U.S. Department of Agriculture will release its prospective plantings report containing farmers' plans for spring planting. The agency held its annual Agricultural Outlook Forum this week in Virginia, containing a very preliminary overview for this season. While there might not be a crop in the ground yet, 2018 has already been a tremendous year for soybeans. Since the beginning of January, the March soybean futures contract added more than 70 cents, with Wednesday's close at $10.34 per bushel. As we discussed last week, part of that rise can be traced to dry conditions in Argentina. That country exports more soybean meal than any other nation in the world. The resulting impact on prices is illustrated by the 19% jump in the nearby meal contract since the first of the year. John joined us Wednesday in Lincoln, where we started our conversation by asking about the ongoing soybean market rally.
Jeff, it's going to keep going up until we rain or we see rain, and neither one of them are in the forecast today, so it's a little higher every day.
How is the underlying strength resulting from soybean meal?
Well, I think it's all driven by soybean meal. If Argentina doesn't sell the beans, they can't crush the beans and sell the meal. So we come back to the U.S. and export the meal, and until something changes, that's going to continue to be the strength is in the meal.
How would you describe the local movement you've seen in sales?
It's been active, both old crop and new crop. I think you can feel the farmer catching up sales. I think you can feel him selling the new crop, getting in front of the crop that he's going to put in the ground. So it has been very active.
Basis moving?
It's weaker. It's weaker on the old crop for sure. New crop is steady in the last 2 weeks.
Do you expect that to continue?
I do, Jeff. I think if you continue to take the old crop higher, we're going to continue to widen the basis. The crusher's making money, but he's got a lot of beans, so he doesn't need to get real aggressive here.
What are you doing with those beans? Are there export markets that are being competitive right now?
There's a pretty good export market, but we're on the tail end of it, so it's a really tricky time. It should go to the crusher, and the U.S. crusher, as I indicated, is making good money. So we'll find out what we do with them. But right now, we'll hold and carry and see if we can get rid of them here if there's a problem in Brazil's harvest.
What do you think is the appropriate way to approach selling strategies?
Jeff, I just think you have to look at what your cost was or what your cost is going to be if it's new crop. And if you know it costs you 9 and you can sell 9.5 cash, you sell. And I don't think you get caught up in Argentina's got problems and it's going to go to 11 or 12. I think you just need to take profits when they're there.
Do you like new crop at this level no matter what, or only if it's a profit?
I think only if it's a profit, Jeff. If you're selling below your cost of production, I'm not sure that makes sense today. You've got a lot of things that can change. You've got an insurance revenue that is almost set now through February. So, sell if you've got profit. If you don't, I would be patient.
What do you expect in Brazil?
Brazil's got a record crop, and I think what we're going to see when the dust settles is the massive Brazilian crop is going to offset any losses in Argentina. So I don't think it's going to be an issue, but we've had a little adjustment, we've had a little fear, and it's healthy. It's good for the market.
Meaning you don't think it'll smoke the market once it comes to?
No, I don't. No, and what I mean by that is I think the Brazilian farmer will be a slower seller, but it will offset the losses in Argentina.
What could we see in corn that could help jolt that market like we've seen in soybeans?
I think what we need to see is we need to see less acres in the next 60 days in North America. And if we do that, I think you've got a chance in 9 months or a year to have something kind of interesting in corn. But it's going to take that. And you can see beans went up a lot, and it took corn up about 15 cents. And in the meantime, you've covered a massive fund short that was your chance. That was your fireworks. And so now that they're flat or long a little bit, it's going to be a little harder to push it.
You have new crop brushing up against 4. Do you like to be a seller there?
You know, that's the same thing as the beans. If you can see that 3.5 or 3.75 for next spring, and it's a profitable level, I would sell it. If you are not at those levels, then I think you can be a little patient. You've got a spring price that's again going to be real close to that $3.95 or $4 mark when we're done in February. So maybe give it a chance a little bit, especially longer term. I think you're going to be okay.
What's basis look like for old crop sales?
Old crop is just steady. The corn has not been overwhelming the last 2 weeks, old crop or new crop, nothing like the beans. So I would say it's steady, to say the least. Domestic demand's been good, the feedlots, the ethanol plants, the hog people, it's been really good.
What's your sense of how much is left in the country?
I think there's 50 or 60% of the corn left in the country, and probably 30% on the beans.
Is it aggressive forward selling at any point yet?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I think step 1 is to clean up the old crop, and step 2 for them is going to be to engage that new crop and get aggressive.
We're about a month away from that acres report. What do you think we'll see?
I think we're going to have more bean acres than corn acres, and that's maybe an indication of a couple things. A little tighter banker financing to the farmer, and I think also people don't want to spend any money. So if you don't put it out there, you can't lose it. So I think that mindset will push more beans in.
The total number, do you think that's going to be a shock to the market when we see corn, beans taking away from wheat perhaps?
That's a good question. I think you'll see certainly a little bit of a surprise with more beans, but the market's kind of anticipating what I'm talking about. So we'll see if we can maybe put a lid on the new crop beans at that point and let new crop corn rally a little bit.
Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will look at grain markets. Nebraska leads the nation in the number of cattle on feed. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said in January the state had nearly 2.8 million animals in feedlots, a 12% increase from a year ago. In the 2018 Nebraska Beef Cattle Report, producers can learn more about several components of feedlot diets. This week, Henry Hilscher will discuss results from studies on silage use. Henry is the feedlot manager at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center near Meade. We talked with him there in January and began by asking him to first explain his research work looking at different levels of silage inclusion.
So we're looking at some different levels of corn silage because we think it's an economical alternative to increase the amount of corn silage in the diets and help use that manure that's generated back on the crop ground and help the small producer, the farmer feeder, make an economical alternative.
At what level is it currently fed among the industry now?
So industry-wide in a finishing diet would probably be somewhere around 15% corn silage inclusion on a dry matter basis, and we're looking at that at 15% as well as 45% of the diet on a dry matter basis.
And what did you learn?
So we saw that taking those cattle at 45%, we can still get almost the exact same performance, a little slower gain and a little less on the feed conversion. But if we look at things from the manure value and putting that back in and incorporating that in the farm ground, it seems to be like a good economical alternative.
You're also looking at different hybrids. Why did you think different hybrids might make a difference?
So we did some work with mycogen seeds, as they have a brown midrib, so it's a low lignin corn silage, and we're looking at potentially if we're feeding higher levels of corn silage, means higher levels of fiber in the diet, but if we have a more digestible fiber, we could get some more efficiency out of that. And so with that, we saw that at higher levels, we saw better performance out of those brown midrib corn silages versus the non-brown midrib.
Additionally, you said one of the questions among the industry is whether or not kernel processing is worth it. What did you guys learn?
So we actually did a kernel processing trial. It's out in the beef report now, and we saw that by doing kernel processing across controls and BMR hybrids, that we actually saw an improvement in feed to gain by using that kernel processing.
In the growing diet, you looked at even higher levels of corn silage. At what level and why?
So in our growing diets, we tried to look at what we thought was a traditional growing diet with corn silage. So we fed 80% corn silage and also incorporated 15% distillers grains as our protein component, and we really saw good improvements by using distillers grains in those diets compared to just straight corn silage. We're talking upwards of 3.5 pounds to 4 pounds a day average daily gain, almost a finishing diet on 80% corn silage.
You mentioned this earlier, but who is this applicable for?
So a lot of this is targeted more towards the smaller guys, the farmer feeders. It's just a lot of corn silage to be putting up for a 20,000 head commercial feedlot. But if the small guys with 1,000 head have 1,000 acres of farm ground, this might be a good opportunity to keep everything on the farm, spread the manure, and keep it all in-house and try to make the whole farm more profitable.
Is the recommendation to go to this way, or is there a good way to try it out to see if it can work for you?
So I think we'd like people to try it, but we're doing the research here first, and we're working on putting an economic analysis together and putting that out, and then also a silage pricing spreadsheet that we want to get out there hopefully this summer. And that way guys can look at it, or at least look at it on the spreadsheet before they decide this is something we want to invest in or we want to risk or take that chance on.
The Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center will host a conference specifically focused on using silage for beef cattle in June. Closer to the event, you'll be able to find more information about topics and speakers at beef.unl.edu. The February Nebraska Farmer details the significant losses some farmers faced last fall due to downed corn. This month's issue says Nebraska Extension's Jenny Reese saw her most severe cases in Hamilton, York, and Clay counties, with losses ranging from 70 to 100 bushels per acre. Reese calls the 2017 season the perfect storm of circumstances. She says some of the factors might include drought stress during pollination, cool August temperatures, and excessive October rains. You can read more about the subject in the February Nebraska Farmer. University of Nebraska-Lincoln researchers have been studying the potential of sensor-based nitrogen fertigation in corn. The sensors can help scientists find possible plant stress, then use an irrigation system to apply nitrogen. Those applications during the season could also minimize nitrogen losses, since they occur while a crop is growing in the field. The results indicate the sensor-based methods might be able to help farmers be more profitable and efficient than they would by using UNL's earlier recommendations. Nebraska Extension's Brian Krienke joined us earlier this week to give more background on the project.
The reason we're doing this sensor-based fertigation is to look for new methods to improve our nitrogen management in corn. There are several areas in the state where nitrate has become a concern, and it's well noted in those communities. And so what we're trying to do is be proactive and find ways that we can help these growers better manage their nitrogen.
How are you getting the sensor-based information that you're using to try to time applications?
We're using handheld sensors on our research study, but it can extend to handheld sensors. It could be a UAV sensor. So far, satellite sensors are not appropriate for what we've been looking at. But basically, we use the sensor and we monitor weekly after a certain growth stage, and that's how we decide when we should fertigate or add nitrogen to the corn.
This is an interesting response in that you found that sensor-based nitrogen fertigation is more profitable and more efficient than just what? A normal way that a farmer would do it?
So we've been comparing against our previous best management practice that we've had for a number of years, which is the UNL algorithm. That's a hand-calculated number that you decide before the growing season begins, and it's based on a number of credits, such as legume credit from your soybeans perhaps, or nitrate in the soil or your water. So we're trying to get to a method that, instead of pre-calculating how much you may need in a given season, figure out how much we need as we go throughout the season, so that changing weather conditions or the growing season environment is always going to be different. This allows us to adapt to that growing season and only apply as much as needed.
The fields that had the sensors, that used the sensors, they weren't always the highest yielding. Is that important?
No, so that's a great point, Jeff. When we're managing with nitrogen, over-applying nitrogen will always get you to that maximum yield level. We're not managing for maximum yield. We're managing for efficiency and profit. And if those two are positive, then we think that's a win-win. And so it's not important that we lose a couple bushels on a given treatment if the efficiency is gained and the profit is maintained or increased.
So by how much did you increase profit or efficiency?
So that varies, obviously. We're using prices before the season begins, and depending on how you calculate application costs, that can vary greatly. But we've seen as much as up to $60 per acre increase for using a sensor-based fertigation over a standard UNL algorithm treatment. But that, keep in mind, that is on 3 site years of research.
And it factors in the use of the sensors?
So far, no. That's why I said there's a lot of caveats to that. It does not factor in the cost of the sensors, although they are fairly low priced if you want to do this in a kind of an averaging basis versus a very site-specific use of these sensors.
Your trials were in Clay Center and at the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte. Is there a reason this wouldn't be applicable in other situations or areas?
That's a great opportunity to learn more. We know that it works well in these 2 areas, and those areas are quite different. Just comparing between the 2, the soils at Clay Center are heavier soils, more mineralization potential typically than North Platte, which also has a more coarse textured soil to allow such losses as leaching. So what we really need to do is take this on farm and go to areas that are mainly affected by the nitrate issue and see how well it works in those areas.
You said this might eventually be a best management practice for corn producers. What's standing in the way of that?
So it might be because we need more data. And it's easy to say that, to be cautious, but until we see data in these regions that are mainly affected by the nitrate issue, I would not feel confident telling all growers that this is a method that is guaranteed to work. We do have data, though, from years past from the Haskell Ag Lab, which was a little different scenario, and it also showed positive results. But because it's not the exact same method that we're doing in this study, I don't want to make direct comparisons to say this would be applicable on any given sandy soil, for example.
Brian says the next step for this research topic would be to look at coarse textured soils. Therefore, he's looking for growers in the Central Platte Natural Resources District and the Bazille Groundwater Management Area who would be willing to conduct trials on their operations as part of the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. 2 weeks ago, you heard our conversation about seeding rates in corn with Kansas State University's Ignacio Ciampitti. This week, we'll show you a second half to that discussion, which includes questions about using nitrogen in soybeans and growing soybeans in back-to-back years, a practice common in his home country of Argentina. The idea of using nitrogen to boost soybean yields isn't new, and this won't be the first time we've covered it. As we've told you previously, UNL studies reveal the practice is generally not profitable. Ignacio presented research on the topic at the recent Nebraska Crop Management Conference, where we asked him to further explain his results.
Based on our research, we decided to take the approach in a different way. We decided to start looking at what are the situations that if we apply nitrogen, soybean might respond. And what we found out in our research is there are specific environmental situations where if you apply nitrogen, soybean could respond. But those situations are too specific. So just to give you an example, many times farmers usually don't, in many situations they don't inoculate. If they don't use any inoculant, and if we have any poor nodulation, or if we have any stress early in the growing season, when I'm talking about a stress situation, it could be flooding, early season, much precipitation, so that bacteria and plant doesn't recognize. Second factor, pH. If you have a very low pH, or if you have problems of nutrient deficiency, that deficiency could be impacting the association of the bacteria with the plant. Another third factor, temperature. If you are running into late planting soybeans, high temperature in soils, then you have also problems with the inoculation. So any situation that is promoting early season stress for the plant, it will probably jeopardize the connection between the plant and the bacteria. If that is the case, then you might find out around mid-August, you go back to your fields and you start looking at deficiency. And the question in your case is, what's going on? Why the Rhizobia didn't work? Many times, for answer that question, you need to go back to the early in the season to start thinking about what were the main factors affecting your nodulation.
So in that instance, I should apply nitrogen?
In that instance, if you really are thinking that, and if you want to maintain your productivity, the only way to rescue that plant is with nitrogen. Economically speaking, the farmer needs to start looking at the calculations and looking how much nitrogen can you apply and how you can secure that in some way effectively apply that nitrogen, because if you apply way too much, then you have the challenge of burning leaves and making more damage than benefit. So that nitrogen needs to go to the soil, and you need to make sure that it's available for the plant. In our studies, when you go to any field conditions with not really much of issues on nodulation, I will say that in few situations, I will say 5% of the cases or even lower than that, we are seeing responses to nitrogen. Still, it's an interesting topic. I think that the way that we need to approach this topic is not by applying nitrogen and trying to see if we can get a response. I think that the approach that we took in the last probably 20, 30 years is the wrong one. The way that we need to approach this topic is, let's start to look at what are the main factors that might affect the fixation, and let's start finding in some way how we can screen the environments and make sure that we can provide to the farmers indicators of potential probability to response.
You're from Argentina, where farmers grow soybeans consistently, year after year after year. This year there might be some interest in doing that. What do you notice when you grow soybeans consistently?
One of the main factors, I mean, when you're looking at monocrop, when you're looking at several years on soybeans, is that soybean is a crop that demands a lot of nutrients. When you're looking at, we discussed recently about nitrogen. Another factor that sometimes we tend to discuss too much is on sulfur. Soybeans are highly extractive on nitrogen and sulfur, and primarily because it's a high protein. It's a high protein, high rich in amino acids. So the quality is basically what is pushing to this plant to keep that uptake. One of the challenges when you look at these systems is many times in our situation, in our case in Argentina, many of our farmers, they didn't treat the soybeans, I mean, in the way that they need to treat applying nutrients, and they avoid nutrient application. So when you look at long-term soybean monocrop, in many of our situations we start seeing problems with sulfur deficiency, and that sulfur deficiency, believe it or not, in many cases you might be able to solve that with 10 pounds of sulfur. And
you can see a yield penalty from that?
And then the second factor is on the yield penalty. When you look at diversity, the lack of diversity on that rotation, monocrop, is basically you start increasing the pressure of insects, disease, and then if you add to the combo of the problem of nutrient deficiency, one of the things that we capture in many of our long-term studies of looking at monocrop soybeans is penalties that they go from 2 or 4 bushels anytime that you grow a consecutive years of soybeans. So if you are starting with a yield, even if you are in a high yielding environment and you start with 70, 80 bushels, you might start seeing that your second year, your yield potential might be less, at 65, and then you are keeping going in that direction. And the question is, at what point will plateau? And then that's something that we don't really want to answer.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. And during this last week, we dealt with several impulses of energy moving out of the western U.S. trough that moved across our region and strengthened as they moved to the east of us. So for most of eastern Nebraska on Monday and Tuesday, we dealt with several rounds of light freezing precipitation, primarily in the form of freezing rain and freezing mist. But as you got closer to this North Dakota or South Dakota border, we had heavier snowfall, and local accumulations up to 4 to 5 inches were reported in isolated locations, but generally 1 to 2 inches was a favor. And then of course we had the other system come through on Thursday and the one that we're dealing with today. So we've been in an active weather pattern, and it looks like that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. So as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is a system that's currently impacting us today. The energy now is just to the southeast of the state and is moving toward the Great Lakes. The low pressure at the surface and fairly tightly wound up, so a lot of wind on the backside of this low pressure system, and of course inclement weather. And we are expecting a total mix of everything you can imagine today, with the heaviest potential for accumulating snowfall across the northeastern part of the state. And then as we go into Sunday, all that activity starts to push to the east as high pressure becomes firmly in control. We're going to be dealing with more of a Pacific high pressure system instead of Arctic, so even though it's going to cool down not significantly, you can see the snowfall exiting out of our region, particularly early in the morning. And then we see the day on Monday, another trough starting to make its way into the western United States. We do show surface low pressure system over the Texas Panhandle, but there's just not a lot of moisture. It's a pretty weak low pressure system. So most of the activity is going to remain up into the northwestern 1/4 of the United States, and of course the heavy precipitation across the eastern seaboard. On Tuesday, that trough starts to make some inroads, deepens a little bit. We start to show surface low developing in the southwestern United States and the Texas Panhandle. That's going to start to move some moisture toward the north, and we will start to see some breakout of some flurry activity, particularly across the northern Rockies and the Plains regions. And then as we go on the day Wednesday, this system starts to progress more in an easterly fashion. Surface low pressure system firmly in control over the Texas Panhandle and over Arkansas, and this will really pump the moisture up into the eastern Corn Belt. So we're going to see a big area of thunderstorm activity with lighter snow bands to the north of it. And then as we go on the day on Thursday, the system makes more progress toward the eastern United States. Low pressure system up over northeastern portions of Ohio. This will really generate some significant moisture right over the same areas that have been inundated with precipitation. Further to the west, we're looking at some possible accumulating snowfall for southeastern Nebraska, but more importantly, on Friday, we see high pressure system building into our region. Warmer temperatures are in store as most of the activity is focused in the western United States with surface lows developing and a big storm system coming on shore. And this system is projected to make inroads into our region as we go into late next week and the following week. So we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast. It kind of picks the feature up with the below normal temperatures associated with this low pressure system. And in terms of precipitation, the first wave comes out early in the period, particularly in the Sunday through Tuesday time period responsible for this heavy precipitation. We may see some significant accumulation of snowfall in portions of eastern Nebraska. And then the second system will quickly follow its heel about 2 or 3 days later. And then after that, the models do indicate the potential for some very warm temperatures building in the western United States and moving into our region as we move into the month of March. And finally, I would like to say good luck to Jeff in his new career. It's been a pleasure working with you all of these years on Market Journal.
Thank you, Al. Yes, after more than 6 years, this is my final show for Market Journal. I'd like to thank our viewers and the market analysts and guests who have appeared on this program, from those here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and other locations in the U.S., to those who welcomed us and spent time with us in Japan, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and China. I'd also like to thank the people who helped with Market Journal along the way. Former host Doug Jose, project assistant Betty Caston, and especially longtime producer Curtis Harms. And I'll say thank you and good luck to Al Dutcher and to Bridget Nelson, our current producer. As always, you can continue to keep up with Market Journal during the week on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Next week, Brad Lubin will give an update on the Farm Bill, and there will be an update on UNL research looking at cover crop use in corn and soybean production. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.